Morning. We're going to start our lesson on the synthesis essay by reviewing argument. The reason we're going to do that is because the synthesis essay is an argument essay. It just includes sources. So remember on the argument essay, they're going to give you a topic and you have to come up with all the ideas and evidence from your own head. Well, the synthesis is like that, except again, they give you, 4, 5, 7 articles or sources, and you get to pick from those. So it's actually a little bit easier. But again, since it's been a while, let's take a look back at the argument essay and just kind of remind you of a few things. So remember, the argument essay is going to give you a position on an assertion on a topic, and it's going to ask you to defend, which means to agree, challenge, which means to disagree, or to qualify, meaning it's right, but only in these circumstances. Okay. We discovered earlier in the semester qualifying is hard because you have to hit a lot more notes and a lot of different factors. These are a little bit easier. Argument essay is scored on 1 to 9. So is the synthesis. Okay. Coming back, remember the essay organization. You want to have an argument as well as a synthesis. You want to have an introduction that includes context or exigence. So what has driven you or the writer to write? You want to give a little bit of an acknowledgement that is included in your thesis statement. So it might look a little bit like this. Although, and so your acknowledgments or concessions can start with although, though, or while. So although many critics disagree with abortion, comma, I feel it serves a beneficial purpose in society. All right. So this is your bit of a concession, okay, which you're going to then go into more detail down here. And then this is your actual thesis statement that you're promising to discuss in your body paragraphs down here. All right. So you've already given a little bit of your concession. So now you know where you're going to go here, or your acknowledgement, you know what you're going to discuss here. So your first body paragraph is going to be either an acknowledgement, which says, here's what the other side says, or a concession, which says, here's where the other side is right. And notice that's very different. This just says, I understand where they're coming from. This says they are right where I am not as right. Okay. Remember, as part of a concession or an acknowledgement, you still get to rebut, which shows how you are still the most right. You can do this acknowledgement or concession as its own body paragraph, or you can actually mix your acknowledgement and concession in the middle of your body paragraphs here, defending your thesis. Okay, so to move on to your body paragraphs, these are going to be the 2 points that support your position. For each of those points, you would have multiple pieces of evidence and a thorough explanation of each. Okay, and again, you could mix this in here. Okay, and then your explanations or your evidence could then serve as a rebuttal as well. Then you want to wrap things up. You're only required to do one sentence. More, of course, will be better. And then that one sentence can be an emotional or ethical relevance of why you're right, or a call to action. If we don't do this, then what terrible thing will happen? All right. Okay, let's take a look. Remember that appropriate evidence for a argument essay is history. So anything from APUSH, your other classroom classes, current events, science, technology, music, sports, human behavior. Remember, if you are an expert at something, you're welcome to bring that in, but it cannot be my cousin's one-time boyfriend did this. Okay, it has to be good, solid information. So on the argument, you have to come up with this on your own. On the synthesis, they give you all of these. You're welcome to bring in additional information, maybe not from the sources provided. Remember, this is like the DBQ, but it needs to be like the good stuff, the good evidence. Okay. Remember, with concession, as we said, it's a good way to develop your ethos, to give your credibility or character. Like, I know what the other side thinks. I'm not totally ignoring them. But you do want to include the rebuttal, which shows how you're still more right. Okay. And then referencing the text, this is something that Ms. Nail and I collaborated on. We're going to do what's called the double reference. You never want to say the first article says, because if you remember back on your DBQ, there is no first, you don't know which one's the first article. So instead, you're going to say Johnson says, or in the New York Times article, that's your first reference. And then at the back end, which is your second reference, that's why it's double reference, you're going to put source A. Okay, so in the New York Times article states source C at the back end. So that's 2 references. And the reason Ms. Neal has asked us to do this is because This is what you're required to do in the DBQ. If you do this, give the author or the title, which they list in the DBQ list, kind of like this, um, that gives you style points, which hits a different part of the APUSH rubric. And this also helps with your style points on the AP4 rubric. So again, double reference, and this is something you're going to be required to do on your news article essay, which is coming up this week. I'll do a different video on that. All right. That covers most of those pieces. Let's take a look at synthesis though, okay? To synthesize, and so this is focusing on specifically the synthesis essay. So to synthesize means to combine separate elements and bring them into one united whole. And that's what you do on the synthesis essay. You take multiple sources and bring them in to support your point. And they're sources that are not necessarily, were never meant to cover your, whatever you want to argue, but by your bringing them together, they do, okay? Synthesis question, as I just said, asks you to synthesize information from a variety of sources to inform your own discussion of a topic. The assignment will look a little bit like this. Read the following sources, including any introductory information. Then in an essay that synthesizes at least 3 of the sources for support, take a position that defends, challenges, or qualifies the claim that. Okay, that should look really similar to you, and that's what you're doing on the synthesis essay. Okay. The timeline, remember on an argument essay as well as the rhetorical analysis, you're given 40 minutes. On the synthesis essay, because of the sources, you are given an additional 15 minutes to read the sources. So that's how you should spend your time. 15 minutes to read and annotate the sources, 10 minutes to plan and organize. That should seem normal because we talked about that with rhetorical. About 25 minutes to write, and then hopefully 5 minutes to edit. Okay, so that's your basic timeline. All right, so what we're going to do, I'm going to pause for a second, and what I'll do is send you the sources for the 2013 synthesis essay so you can kind of see what it's all about. And then if you have questions, I'm going to need you to let me know what you're thinking. What I'll show you before then is the T-chart, which I think is going to be really helpful to you. Okay, so before I get to that, so here's what you do in those 15 minutes. Remember the reading part of your 55 minutes. So you'll want to read, annotate, and categorize your sources. We're going to do that using a T-chart. And remember when we talk about annotation from our rhetorical analysis, you want to not just underline, but you also want to note, like, why are you underlining it? So what about that source is going to be helpful to your topic? You want to identify quotables. That's what's going to go into your T-chart. And these, I feel like you should decide whether you're going to defend, challenge, or qualify before you start writing. But these quotables can also help you as you go along. Okay, so here's the T-chart we were talking about. If you've already decided whether you're going to agree or disagree with your topic, go ahead and make a T-chart on a scratch sheet of paper. And this is where you're going to put your sources. And you put source A and then the quote. It doesn't even have to be the whole quote, piece of the quote, okay? Because you can actually go back to source A and see that. Source B, here's my quote. Here's a side, and go ahead and put, even though you maybe have already decided to agree with the topic, go ahead over here and put source C and a quote. Because once you get that filled in, you'll start to notice you now have an outline for how you want, what the quotes that you want to use in your essay. And you'll also notice that you already have your concession. Even if you decided to disagree with the topic, you have your concession over here. So it's like it's an outline. It means that you're ready to write. I would then take the extra step of, if I want this source A quote, actually would go well with the source F quote down here, and I'll mark those with a 1 over here, a 1. So I know when I'm writing, these 2 quotes go together. These 4 quotes go together. Okay, so that's the use of the T-chart, which most of my AP kids from last year found very helpful.